On December 26, 1996, the day after Christmas, JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old girl with a bright smile and gorgeous beauty pageant outfits, disappeared. In just a few hours, the Ramsey family's house became the scene of a heartbreaking crime.
911 emergency. Police, what's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left in our daughter's drawer. A note was left in your daughter's drawer? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old.
JonBenét not only went missing, but later, her body was found in her own house. The girl was brutally beaten and strangled to death. It is worth mentioning that at the scene, a lengthy blackmail letter was left, shocking public opinion and stimulating the curiosity of those following the case. In public opinion, suspicion quickly fell on the girl's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, who would later have to live in the shadow of this case forever. Are JonBenét Ramsey's parents the ones who caused her tragic death, or is this just a theory that many people are talking about? Join us in rediscovering the mysterious details of this case in 2025. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Cold Radio Channel to follow more scary cases from previous years. From the early days, police had theorized that Patsy Ramsey may have accidentally killed her daughter in a fit of anger over bedwetting, and then staged the crime to cover it up. The media constantly pieced together every detail, from the Ramsey family's behavior to small abnormalities in the house. However, John and Patsy Ramsey were never charged. At that time, they faced suspicion from the public, from the police, and even from people close to them. But what happens when people have to live under the shadow of suspicion all their lives? Currently, at the age of over 80, John Ramsey still constantly calls for justice for his daughter. Along with that comes a strong desire to clear the family's honor, not only for himself, but also for the next generation. John said in a thoughtful, determined voice,
"Finding the killer isn't going to change my life at this point, but it will change the lives of my children and my grandchildren. This cloud needs to be removed from our family's head, and this chapter closed for their benefit. So there is an answer."
Patsy Ramsey, mother, wife, could not control her pain when recalling the accusations. She looked straight at the camera, her eyes full of sadness. If our DNA matched any significant evidence, they would have arrested us immediately. I did not kill my child. Her words were short but full of meaning, expressing strong resistance to what the family had to endure over the years. We have obtained tapes of police interviews with John and Patsy, tapes that have never been published before. In it, we see a Patsy Ramsey clearly expressing frustration. She shouted, "I don't care how scientific they are. Go back and start over." Her voice was choked, as if she was facing an invisible pressure that only she could feel. Reporter Aaron Merard, who led the show's 6-month investigation, shares his thoughts. "I don't think the Ramseys did this. I think they should start looking for the people who actually did it." With a sad expression, John shared, "She is the fire of our family. With her dynamism, she makes everything lively and full of life. Without her, things are no longer the same." Meanwhile, the suffering seemed unspeakable in their eyes. Between tears, Patsy affirmed, "Why is it so difficult for people to understand that we love her with all our hearts? We would never harm a single hair on our children's heads. That is unimaginable to us." With us. Although they were never called suspects or charged with a crime, the reality was that John and Patsy Ramsey always lived in the shadow of their mission. Every time JonBenet is mentioned, they face skepticism, even though they are not related at all. John Ramsey shares in disappointment. "We could find the murderers tomorrow. The substance could be caught, convicted, and jailed, but we would still have 20% of the population believing I had something to do with the job." When the reporter asked the question, "That night, did your daughter have a bedwetting incident? Were you angry? And did you hurt her?" John Ramsey answered quickly, his voice decisive. "No, I didn't." When the reporter continued with the question, "What was your reaction when you learned that many people believe you did it?" John Ramsey's eyes were full of fatigue and pain. He replied, "They're wrong. I don't know what to say. How do you say no other than saying no? No means no. Please understand." The Ramsey family's life has never been the same again. The case of JonBenét's death has disrupted everything, not only physically but also mentally. After losing their young daughter, they had to face an undercurrent of public opinion and were constantly pressured. John and Patsy, who once lived a luxurious life, now have to sell their $1 million home in Atlanta and move to a smaller place. The new house cannot bring them a sense of safety or peace when the memories of the case still haunt them. John Ramsey, who was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar software company, has not worked in the past 4 years. Everything seems to be falling apart, and memories of the past have become an indelible burden. Meanwhile, Patsy, the wife and mother of the family, struggled with cancer. The disease not only attacked her health but also damaged her spirit. Patsy looked straight at the camera, her eyes full of fatigue and disappointment. She gently said, "This is the painting I wanted to paint during my cancer treatment, but I was too tired to do it." In a rare moment without makeup or wig, Patsy appeared almost unrecognizable. Her hair has fallen out due to chemotherapy, and her eyebrows are gone. The traces of cancer seem to be deeply imprinted on her face. But for a brief moment, she sighed, trying to find the strength to answer the next question. The reporter asked, "How did you find out the disease came back?" Patsy replied in pain, "In February, during my annual checkup." 9 years ago, she discovered she had stage 4 ovarian cancer, a disease that is not easy to beat. However, she still holds hope. But earlier this year, Patsy faced a painful round of chemotherapy, a new battle she never expected. The reporter continued, "Are you losing your hair?" Patsy smiled, even though her face was no longer as bright as before. "That's right, but now my hair is growing back and so are my eyebrows. But you know, that's just a small thing to worry about." However, in their minds, the story of JonBenet is always the biggest obsession. When JonBenet's body was discovered, Boulder police immediately suspected that John and Patsy were the culprits. They claimed that the family killed the girl and staged a fake kidnapping, with a 2.5-page blackmail letter to create the perfect drama. "They never investigated this case other than our family," John Ramsey recalled with frustration. Although police insisted they had not ruled out other theories, the Ramseys remained prime suspects in their eyes. In a videotaped deposition last November, Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner admitted that the department had considered John and Patsy suspects from the start. "Why do you think you're still prime suspects in the eyes of the Boulder police?" the reporter asked. John Ramsey, looking sad, recalled Mark Beckner's response as he stood near him. "I asked Mark Beckner. I was closer to him than you and I are now, and I said, 'Tell me what made you think I killed my beautiful, precious daughter.' And he said, 'Well, it's just a lot of little things.' I don't think he really knew." The investigation continued, but there was not enough evidence to convict anyone. A source close to the investigation shared that the police tried to psychologically pressure the Ramseys, hoping that one of them would confess. John, unable to hide his frustration, said, "The strategy was to put a lot of pressure on us to force us to break down." However, the strategy was not just psychological pressure. It also included leaks to the tabloids, which severely tarnished the Ramseys' reputation. Sensational, untrue headlines were everywhere. Lawyer Lynn Wood criticized, "You can't go shopping without seeing headlines saying John Ramsey abused his first daughter, completely false. Headlines saying they were pornographers, completely false. Headlines saying they were Satan worshippers, completely false." The Ramsey family believes Boulder police are still ignoring key evidence that could lead to other suspects. Frustration and anger well up inside John Ramsey. He can't understand why police aren't pursuing other leads. The reporter asked the next question. You said it made you angry, but you didn't seem angry. Do you think it damaged your public image? John responded calmly, but there was still a strong determination in his voice. We're not actors in a TV series. I think if I were an actor, it might be different. He continued, with a determined look in his eyes. I can appear extremely angry, but that's not who I am. What you see is me, and this is how I express my anger. I'm angry because, as far as I know, the murderer or murderers are still out there. What I know for sure is that we didn't kill our daughter. So look at the whole picture, guys. June 23, 1998, Broomfield, Colorado. It had been nearly a year and a half since JonBenet's death, but the memory of their young daughter still haunted the Ramsey family. John and Patsy Ramsey were being questioned again. This time, they were not together. They were each taken into separate interrogation rooms, and Boulder Police Department detectives were trying to peel back the layers of what they believed to be a mysterious story. Detective Lou Smith, assigned to the investigation, listened carefully to each question and responded to John's statements. He cut John off as he tried to explain his relationship with his wife. You know, there's a lot of speculation out there that maybe you didn't know anything about the murder, but maybe Patsy did. John didn't let the detective continue, quickly interrupting, and the tension in his voice was clear. That's nonsense. Patsy loved both of our children very much, but honestly, she and JonBenet were extremely close. There was no doubt in John's words. Even as a father facing a storm of public opinion and criticism, he still insisted on his wife's love for his daughter. There was no doubt in John's words. Even as a father facing a storm of criticism, he insisted on his wife's love for his daughter. Meanwhile, Patsy was also being questioned, but she was not alone in her interrogation room. She was on medication for anxiety and depression, which both she and John had struggled with during this traumatic time. Detective Tom Haney asked her in a cold tone, "If I told you we had concrete evidence that seemed to implicate you in JonBenet's death, what would you say?" Patsy, her eyes teary but determined, replied immediately, "That's impossible. Check it out." The sense of confusion and fear in Patsy's words could not be hidden. She knew she was innocent, but she also knew that things could get worse if the police found something that could incriminate her. The feeling of being framed, of being a suspect, was too much to bear. Detective Tom Haney was more adamant. Why not? Patsy looked straight at the detective, her lips pressed together, and replied, "I didn't kill my son. I had nothing to do with it. And I'm not talking about someone else's theory, a rumor, or a story. I don't care what you're talking about." The detective refused to back down. "I'm talking about scientific evidence." Patsy looked at him with a determined look, and her voice became stronger. "I don't care what your scientific evidence is. Go back and check it from the beginning. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it. And we don't know who did it. So from today on, we need to work together to find out who really did this." The interrogation dragged on. The tapes, with their repetitive, unsettling questions, seemed to be buried in the darkness. Investigators tried to find connections, details that might unravel the mystery behind the girl's death. But everything became more vague than ever. One question the detective could not ignore. "Have you heard of the pineapple?" Patsy, seemingly exhausted by the questions, answered in a confused manner, "We were asked if JonBenet had eaten pineapple, because it was apparently found in her digestive system. I think the question was whether she had eaten pineapple when she got home. I'm sure she didn't, because when she got home she was in a deep sleep. However, the autopsy showed otherwise. Although the Ramseys insisted that JonBenet had not eaten anything when she got home, the results showed that there was undigested pineapple in her stomach. A bowl of pineapple was found in the family's dining room, along with fingerprints on it. The detective did not miss this detail. So, whose bowl of pineapple was that? Patsy, with a look of no doubt on her face, replied firmly, I did not put that bowl there. I would not do anything like that." The detective stared at her, as if trying to find the answer deep in Patsy's eyes. "But if it's not yours, if it's not John's, then it must be someone else's, right?" Patsy replied, her voice trembling but showing no sign of surrender. "I'm telling you it's not anyone else's. Those fingerprints belong to one of us. I'm sure of it." However, the fingerprints on the pineapple bowl were Patsy's, according to police, which only made investigators more suspicious that she might be lying about the whole thing. The detective didn't stop. Sometimes the little things, even the most obscure things, can be incredibly important. Patsy just looked down, her face tense, her hands clenched. She said in a voice that was almost hopeless, "I don't know how it got in her stomach. I don't know where that pineapple bowl came from." After 3 days of intense questioning, the investigation into JonBenét Ramsey's 1998 death resulted in no formal charges against the Ramsey family. However, Boulder police maintained their suspicions that they were involved in the case. In August 2000, after the Ramseys had moved to Atlanta, prosecutors continued their investigation and provided new information. During a meeting in Atlanta, prosecutors raised suspicions about Patsy's role, particularly the discovery of fibers on a paint tray, evidence of a strangulation device, and sexual abuse of JonBenet. These fibers were said to match those on Patsy's red jacket, and prosecutors pointed out that they appeared on several key pieces of evidence in the case, including the paint tray, the rope, and the victim's mouth tape. Patsy, despite vigorous questioning, steadfastly denied any involvement in her daughter's death, and she insisted that there was no concrete evidence linking her jacket to her daughter's death other than the fibers. Even when prosecutor Bruce Levon claimed that the fibers could directly link her to the case, Patsy denied all charges, insisting that she was just a grieving mother who wanted to find her daughter's killer. However, tensions between the Ramsey family and prosecutors grew. Patsy, in a moment of deep emotion, shared the anxiety of living under suspicion. "I appreciate you guys being here, but it's hard to sit at home in Atlanta, Georgia, and every minute of every day I wonder what you're doing. Are you finding anything? Is the killer watching my house? Is my son safe?" Patsy's husband, John Ramsey, also expressed his grief. "My life has been a living hell since that day. I want to know who is responsible for my daughter's death." Although Boulder police and prosecutors declined to comment publicly, Lou Smith, who continued to pursue the case, believed that the Ramseys had nothing to do with JonBenet's death. Smith, after working independently and interviewing the Ramseys, began to believe that evidence was being overlooked or corrupted. He strongly opposed the theory that a parent could have killed their child, pointing out that the case had the distinctive hallmarks of sexual assault and brutality by an outsider. Smith criticized the lack of attention to important signs in the case, such as JonBenet's violent resistance before she was killed and the brutality of the murder. He also did not believe the theory that Patsy could have been involved in the use of an elaborate garrote to kill her child. Lou Smith asserted, "This is not a case where a mother wakes up in the middle of the night, thinks she accidentally hurt her child, and decides to take her down to the basement, create an elaborate device like this, put it around her child's neck and squeeze it a few times while she's struggling. If you want to believe that, go ahead, but I don't." As for the fibers from Patsy's red coat, Lou Smith stressed that this evidence was not enough to convict. The fibers could have come from the coat or something like that. You can't rely on that evidence alone, especially when there are dozens of other fibers of unknown origin at the scene. He believes that the murder involved a sexual predator and that the case was not an accidental act. Lou Smith concluded, "This is an important clue from the killer. It shows his mindset. This is a sexual device. I'm looking for a pedophile, a sexual predator." The story continues to shock and many questions remain unanswered. The JonBenét Ramsey case has become one of the most mysterious in American history, where evidence, theories, and the emotions of those involved intertwine to form an incomplete picture. 2 private investigators, Ollie Gray and John San Agustin, were hired by the Ramsey family to solve the case, and they also believe that the Ramseys are innocent. They point out that the DNA found under JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear does not match any members of the Ramsey family, raising questions about their involvement in the case. John Ramsey has stated that if their DNA matches any of the key evidence, they will be immediately arrested. Lou Smith, the lead investigator on the case, continued to pursue the theory that the killer was an intruder. He pointed to an open basement window, with no leaves or dirt around it, and a scratch on a nearby wall, suggesting that someone could have climbed in or out of the house through that window. Smith performed a climb-in test through the window and confirmed that it would have been fairly easy to climb in or out by standing on a suitcase placed at his feet. Lou Smith also expressed doubts about the 2.5-page ransom note left behind by the killer. The note was written on the Ramsey family's paper and pen, which Boulder police have taken as a sign that Patsy wrote it to make the murder look like a kidnapping. However, Smith argued that a smart criminal would not have brought paper and pen, as they could be traced back to him. Most families, he said, would have had paper and pens in their homes, and an experienced criminal would have avoided leaving traces that could be linked to the family. One of Lou Smith's key theories was the small injuries to JonBenet's face and back, which he said were evidence that the killer was an intruder. Smith suggested that the killer used a stun gun, an electronic device used to stun victims. He argued that only an intruder would have used a stun gun to subdue JonBenet and take her to the basement. Smith also stressed that there was no reason for JonBenet's parents, like John and Patsy, to have used a stun gun to stage the murder of their daughter. When asked if the Ramseys owned a stun gun, Lou Smith asserted that there was no evidence that the Ramseys ever owned one, further bolstering his belief in the intruder theory. However, despite the strong arguments and evidence Lou Smith and the private investigators had in favor of the intruder theory, the investigation continued to encounter obstacles, and experts could not completely rule out the possibility that Patsy Ramsey was the writer of the ransom note. The case of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most famous and controversial in American criminal history. Evidence of injuries on JonBenét Ramsey's body became a key element in the investigation into her death. The wounds on JonBenet's face and back were evenly spaced, about 1.5 inches apart, similar to the distance between the prongs of a stun gun. Lou Smith conducted tests using a prototype stun gun and found the results to be consistent with the injuries on JonBenet's body. He believed the injuries were consistent with the use of a stun gun in the attack. Dr. Michael Doberson, chief medical examiner in Arapahoe County, agreed with Smith that the injuries were likely caused by a stun gun. "If it wasn't a stun gun, I want to know what it was," he said. However, not all experts agree. Dr. Werner Spitz, a nationally recognized forensic pathologist, has stated that the injuries could not have been caused by a stun gun, as stun gun injuries typically leave electrical burns, which JonBenet's injuries did not. Both Dr. Spitz and Dr. Doberson had access to photographs and were unable to examine JonBenet's body, creating uncertainty about the exact cause of the injuries. Lou Smith, however, remains convinced that a stun gun was the weapon used in the murder. He said that experts have determined with 95% certainty that a stun gun was used in the crime. However, investigators have abandoned the idea of exhuming JonBenet's body for direct examination, leaving many questions about the weapon used unanswered. JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, expressed disgust at the idea, as the family had buried their daughter and wanted her to rest in peace. Although the controversy surrounding the wound evidence and the use of the taser has not been fully resolved, Lou Smith remains steadfast in his belief that if a taser was indeed used, it was most certainly not JonBenet's parents. He continues to search for the killer or those who possess the weapon, in the hope that one day the truth will be revealed and the killer brought to justice. The intruder theory is one of the more prominent theories surrounding the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. Many investigators, most notably Lou Smith, believed that a sex offender broke into the Ramsey family home and killed JonBenet. Lou Smith offers several strong points for this theory, including the events of the night of the first anniversary of JonBenet's death. Dozens of people lit candles outside the Ramsey family home, and one of them, Gary Oliva, caught the attention of investigator Lou Smith. Oliva, a convicted sex offender in Oregon, had previously assaulted a 7-year-old girl and had also attacked his mother with a telephone cord. What made Smith and private investigators John San Agustin and Ollie Gray suspicious was Oliva's location. In December 1996, Oliva was living very close to the Ramsey family home, just a few houses away from JonBenet's bedroom window. They also discovered that Oliva frequented buildings owned by a local church, where many homeless people received food and mail, about 10 doors down from the Ramseys. Lou Smith doesn't believe that Boulder police did enough to investigate Oliva. He points out that police did nothing about Oliva for nearly 4 years after the murder, despite his arrest for drug possession and possession of a stun gun. When Oliva was arrested, he was questioned about whether he had used a stun gun on children, but denied it. Oliva did, however, admit to having an obsession with JonBenet, saying she came to him after she was killed. However, despite his suspected connections to the case, Boulder police did not fully investigate Oliva for a long time, and it was only after his arrest in 2000 that interest began to focus on him. Alex Hunter, a former Boulder prosecutor, asked police to pursue other leads and not just focus on the Ramsey family. The intruder theory remains controversial, but the leads, especially Oliva's involvement, did not appear to be fully investigated by Boulder police, leading some to believe that the perpetrator may have been an outside intruder, rather than the Ramsey family. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey continues to be one of the most famous and controversial cases in American history. Despite many leads and theories, there is not enough evidence to convict anyone beyond a reasonable doubt, which has left the case at a standstill. The intruder theory persisted, and Gary Oliva, though not an official suspect, was linked to the case by Lou Smith and private investigators. Although Oliva's DNA did not match the evidence at the crime scene, his presence at the scene and his past sexual offenses were factors that raised suspicion among investigators. However, Boulder police did not confirm him as a suspect, and many key leads remained uninvestigated in the early years of the case. In fact, the lack of aggressiveness in pursuing leads caused some investigators, such as Lou Smith, who believed in the Ramseys' innocence, to challenge the Boulder police approach. Meanwhile, Alex Hunter, a former Boulder prosecutor, suggested that Lou Smith may have been emotionally involved in his judgment, given his ties to the Ramseys. Still, JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, remains hopeful that the case will be solved. He believes that DNA technology in top laboratories can help to unravel the murderer, who he believes was in the Ramsey family home on Christmas Eve. However, to this day, the murderer has never been caught. Although the Ramsey family has endured much criticism and pain from the public, especially Patsy Ramsey, who died in 2006, John Ramsey remains steadfast in his belief that one day the truth will be revealed. The case, which has dragged on for more than 2 decades, is still unsolved, but the Ramsey family and those seeking justice have not given up hope. Based on the evidence available, the testimony of John Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey, and the suspicions raised by the police, do you believe that JonBenet's parents were involved in their daughter's death and escaped conviction by the law? If that is true, they may have avoided the court of man, but the court of conscience will never let them go. Please share your thoughts and opinions about the case in the comments section. If you find this story valuable, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next interesting content. The journey to discover the truth is long, and it is your support that will motivate us to continue searching, analyzing, and bringing the most thought-provoking stories. Thank you for following and accompanying us.